Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to Star Citizen. This will really be my sort of review / take on Star Citizen after my shorts let's try I've done of about 5 episodes. And I think the first thing it's right to start off with is that this is going to be positive and negative and have a mix of things in there. So don't take it as all being one way. There are pluses and minuses. But without further ado, I'm going to start with graphics. We can see here that the asteroid field I'm in is absolutely amazing. The ships look amazing. You just look at them, the actual design, the attention to detail is like, well, it's like nothing else. It's proper AAA game sort of stuff. It's really ambitious, especially for something that's ultimately aimed at being some sort of MMO. With that comes things like physics, and physics themselves in the game are actually pretty good. I've seen a few niggly things, guns sliding around on the floor, character interactions with stuff that looks a bit jank, but on the most part, the physics are pretty good. Every game with physics has its interesting foibles, and I'm willing to forgive a game in alpha certainly some of those physics foibles. So let's not dwell too much on that. I think generally it's good. However, when it does go bad, it can go really bad. For example, I had a ship full of ore that I'd taken to a base to sell the ore, blow up on the landing pad as I opened the back, and it had a physics interaction with the light on the floor. Next up, I think it's only right to talk about the gameplay. And the gameplay is going to fall into many elements. First, flight. The flight systems are absolutely brilliant, very much like Elite Dangerous in a lot of ways. I'm not the greatest flyer out there, but I found it quite intuitive generally in how you fly. Many of the buttons and sort of things you can press are quite extensive, so I certainly didn't pick up all of that. But the actual way things handle and the way things work seem to be very good to me. I quite enjoy it. Next up, ground fighting. Ground fighting, in terms of that, I think the NPCs are a little bit easy. The AI needs some improvement, but again, game in development, so gotta think about stuff like that. These things can be improved, and you know, without the recent developments in, for example, Imperium, which I play a lot of, it could be said that the actual AI there has been pretty questionable at times. And it can even be seen in many AAA games when the AI does some weird things. So ground fighting, yes, needs some work, but overall, not too bad. Guns are quite fun, quite accurate, hitboxes are quite fun, so that's all good. Next, I'm going to just talk about immersion briefly, which is a word I kind of hate in some respects, but the world is quite immersive. You do feel like you're part of the world. It does suck you in, it does make you feel like you're really part of the game, though the menu system I think actually needs work. In terms of interaction in the actual world, seems good. Many of the sort of drone NPCs which are around the facilities, much like the star bases we've been to in that, as you've seen, sometimes they're just lined up standing there. They're slightly less immersive. They need some more idle actions, more idle chatter, all of stuff that can be sort of improved. But none of that is game breaking nor ruining. The actual environments are quite immersive in themselves. Next up, one of my sort of slight issues with gameplay is travel and speed. Firstly, obviously, speed is to some extent for general flight fine. I have no issue with that whatsoever. I mean, obviously I crashed in my first episode, but you know, that was me not quite understanding how that worked and how it was going to be. To be honest, part of the flight characteristics, I have no problem with that. Quant travel I have a little bit more trouble with, mainly just the time it takes to travel long distances. At the moment you only have a single star system, and soon you can be talking about travelling in between star systems. When it takes 10 minutes of just sitting there doing nothing to travel across the star system, I think 10 minutes is probably a little harsh, maybe more like 5 or 6. But look, I've gone away and made a cup of tea and come back again in the time it takes to cross from Microtech to Crusader. So it's longer than I would like. Again, most MMOs, such as your ESO and character first-person MMOs, you're going to be looking at being able to travel around via way shrines relatively quickly. In all fairness, World of Warcraft, when you used to travel on the back of the griffins, it was a lot slower and it would take you 10 minutes to travel from one end of the map to the other. So there's an element of that, but I do think it could do with speeding up a bit to make just the game a bit more engrossing. Questing wise, I think questing wise, and this is where we're going to fall slightly into something else here with questing wise, I think the quest system needs work in order to pull the character in or pull the player in, and with that they need to introduce a nice little tutorial system which brings you into that. You know, a flight school, then opening up into the bounty hunters thing, a mining school, things like that, maybe some guilds or something like that, to try and pull players in to that world and actually make them engage with the quest system, and at the same time learn the basics of how the game works. Because at the moment it's a steep learning curve straight out, and you just have to Google it and try and watch other YouTube videos and try and figure out how things work, because ain't nothing in the game to tell you how anything works other than the keyboard little diagram there, but that doesn't actually tell you everything. For example, like the comms to leave, to tie that to a button, you have to go into the advanced menu and you have to know it's there. So on to the more basic things, like the grind of mining. Mining is going to be a grind, and for people to get the big money, it's going to be a grind. That again, it's not particularly enjoyable, and I think there needs to be a bit more diversity in how you can make money. Hopefully, maybe I've missed it, I'm going to have a look at this, but there should be some more ground activities, maybe fighting NPCs and stuff like that, in order to make some money with things like that as well. Because at the moment making money is kind of boring, and I know it's not particularly fun in a lot of MMOs, but I can still engage in it quite happily in many MMOs, whereas in this one it is a bit slow and boring, but at the same time it has an element of chill about it, the same as say playing Farming Sim or something like that. But I wouldn't say it's as fun as playing Farming Sim. It's just not. And that's where we get to building up as well. Building up to me seems very slow, especially when you're a new player and you've not had any of that information, and then you have the little bugs that come in and lose you value as well, much like I talked about the loss of the ship containing all my ore. That was all my ore. It cost me like 50-60k to get that ore in terms of ship rentals, and then it all got blown up and I lost everything. So I'm down 50-60k due to bugs. And again, this is a alpha game, so some of that is to be expected. Moving on, as it going further as an MMO, I noticed I filmed this over the late Christmas period, early January period, and during the times the servers were busier, it was definitely more glitchy. You were definitely more prone to getting server logout errors and things like that. So at the moment, if it's gonna expand as an MMO, if they're gonna bring the people in to bring the world alive, then it is gonna need stronger servers. And that is something that can be developed with time, but it will need it. Having said that, there's also going to be PvP issues there as time goes on in terms of enemies with piracy and things like that. There's going to need to be some sort of restrictions there, because I think that's going to drive away a lot of players who just want to do a PvE thing, or maybe they'll bring in PvE servers, which again would work well. It would solve that issue and would give some of those players what they're looking for if they just want to play around in the world of Star Citizen, because it's a nice world. I've actually got a point here to talk about tutorials and new players. I kind of covered this earlier on. The game just needs tutorials. It needs some guidance, maybe some starter hints. There are hints that come up on the bottom of the screen. I don't feel particularly engaged by them. I often miss them because I'm looking too much at what else is going on around and don't manage to read them. I feel like almost there needs to be an in-your-face tutorial questline system that is optional, but you can do it, and it's the first thing that pops up when you log on as a new character. You know, come do our quest thing. If you dismiss it, go here to do the quest. and then you can do that tutorial system and learn at least the basics. And hopefully in that quest system they can describe some of the basic mechanics of how the economy is going to work and how the world works from that side of things, how to make money. Next up is DC's resets and economical pain, which is, as I sort of touched on before, the moment there are DCs and I've had things where just logging out has caused me to go back to the main spawn point, even though I'm supposed to have logged out in a bed. It's supposed to be fine. Things don't work properly. Again, alpha MMO, gonna give it a bit of a pass here, but most MMOs have persistent armor, persistent gear, persistent locations. And I know this is something they're trying to bring in somewhat in the next patch, which I think is 3.18. That is supposed to be something that is coming to help bring that together, and hopefully it will help engage the world more there. I managed to go back to see my body at one point, but you know, I want to be able to log out in my ship in space and come back in and be in my ship in space. I don't want to have to go to a base every time to log off, or if I do have to go to a base every time to log off, I want that to be made clear, and I want there to be somewhere I can go and get in a bed and log off, so as I don't have to discover my armor's disappeared. Anyway, moving on from there, character persistence, which I'm talking about here, may get fixed. Economical pain relating to all of this, well, as I talked about, obviously if you're losing stuff, it's costing you. And as an early player, when you're struggling for money, this can be super frustrating. And this drives you towards their sort of cash shop in terms of ships and stuff like that. And that is very expensive, and I'll touch on that in a bit. Game balance, which I've got down here, is actually not too bad, I don't think. I mean, I think it'd take a long time to earn the big bucks. I think it's something like 35 million to buy the biggest, baddest ship in the game, or poshest ship in the game, I should say. However, I don't think that is unachievable. If you want to grind at it, if you really like the game, if you keep pushing at it, I think it'll be okay. The other thing that has to be warranted with that at the moment is, as this game is in alpha, at 3.18 for example, they expect to reset everything, so you'll be back with only a ship you've bought in the cash shop, and again that pushes you towards the cash shop, so do remember that you will lose everything in those situations. And I guess until the game goes version 1.0, it will be a case of there are going to be times when you lose everything and have to start from scratch. So be prepared for that if you're going to get involved in the game at that point, because everything will be gone sooner or later. But in the long term, at some point there will have to be, when it goes version 1.0 or whatever, it would have to be actually a persistent universe forever. At that point, I don't see how they could work it with periodic resets. I mean, I know Conan does it, but I would get very frustrated with that, and I'd be like, nah, I'm out at that point if that was the long-term case. Next up, I have here written down 10 years in alpha. Well, this is very true. This game is in alpha, and has been so since 2012, 2013, when it was first a Kickstarter. Can't remember when the servers first went live, but I mean, this game has been in alpha forever, and it shows no sign of coming out of alpha anytime soon. And with that, I think there is a cause for concern. The game is beautifully detailed in some ways, but it feels like a game that may never get finished. And when you're paying for the equivalent of a AAA game, you know, a game that's not going to be finished kind of sucks. I mean, I know people would say here about like Cyberpunk and things like that. You bought that, it was full of bugs. And sure, it was, and that's fair. But a year down the line, most of those bugs were fixed and the game was pretty playable. Here, 10 years down the line, there's still a myriad of bugs, loads of them. Some of them quite game-breaking in ways, like falling through a freaking station, you know, and things like that. And these things happen often enough that it's not just the odd mistake, it's a lot. I have never really encountered in many MMOs that many game-breaking bugs, essentially. I've fallen through the world once in ESO, but that's once in years of playing. You know, I had a couple of things in World of Warcraft, but again, very small. You know, it tends to be very up together. So again, I will admit, alpha game, yes I know, but bugs need to be hammered out. And they need to think about when the game is going to go alpha and how they're going to manage that with many players and keep consistency, because it's just going to put too many people off. Now let's talk about value for money. Okay, so for a basic starter ship, it'll set you back, I think, you know, about 45 quid, which is not as much as some top AAA games these days, but it's also not cheap. And I have no idea where these missiles came from. I hope they don't explode. The basic ships are the basic ships. I think with the Nomad all in, if you get it on when it's a deal, it's about £70 or something, and that's about the same price as a proper AAA game. That is, you know, pretty pricey for at the moment what you get. Graphically beautiful, yes, but is it fully playable? Would I say it's worth the money? This depends on your opinion. You know, your long-term value for money might be good if you get into it and play it. If it's the kind of thing that excites you, yes, it may well be worth it. But if it's something that just interests you and it's going to be a passing sort of thing, then maybe not. And also remember, some of the big ships, big things are in the cash shop, and the cash shop is really a license to print money. There is so many expensive ships in there, it's unbelievable, and I'm talking ships that can cost £1,000 real money to pay for, and that is just insane. So buyer beware, I would say, and also beware in relation to the 10 years in alpha. This game may never get finished and it may die. Bear that in mind. It's a chance you take with any MMO that eventually it will die, but this one could die before it actually gets out of the gates proper. On that, I'm going to give a quick opinion on a couple of starter ships I run into. Many people are recommending the Cutter. I would say no, it's not fantastic. It's okay, but it's nothing special. A lot of people recommend the Avenger Titan, which does look very good, seems to be a very capable fighter, apparently more so than the ship I'm flying from my understanding and having seen it in action. However, if you want that jump start, in my opinion, the Nomad makes a great start, because you're never going to be a god tier fighter in your starter ship anyway, and if you can just rent that miner for 4k, or well, nearly 5k, get going and get started on that basis, then you are going to be laughing to quickly get yourself up the ranks. Sure, you're going to have to mine probably 2.5 million, get a prospector, and then get the things and start mining Quantanium, but I guess that's how it's going to go. But for now, that's my opinions on it. Yes, I know I didn't say you should buy it or you shouldn't, but it is down to personal opinion. Watch the playthroughs, see if you think you can put up with the bugs, and decide if you think you like it. For now, that's going to be it from Star Citizen, and I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe as always, and join us again in the future.